Most Latino men don't actually struggle with anger. What we struggle with are the emotions that come before anger. Because growing up, anger was often the only emotion that we were actually allowed to show. And a lot of us didn't even realize it until we became adults. Until we started dealing with relationships, responsibilities, pressure, and suddenly noticing that anger just shows up faster than we expect. Not because we're angry people, but because we were never taught how to process the emotions that are underneath it. A lot of Latino men grew up in environments where strength was emphasized very early on. You hear things like, handle it yourself, don't complain, be strong. And sometimes it wasn't even words, really. Sometimes it was just the way emotions were treated around you, right? You didn't see men talking about how they felt. You saw men pushing through things, working harder, staying quiet, carrying things on their own. And over time, that teaches you something. It teaches you to contain your emotions, not to process them. And to be clear, I'm not trying to blame our parents. Most of them were doing the best they could with what they know. They were trying to just prepare us for survival. But survival and emotional awareness are not the same thing. And here's where things start to show up, right? Because emotions don't just disappear when you ignore them. They translate. Sadness turns into anger. Fear also turns into anger. Shame turns into anger. Feeling misunderstood turns into anger. So what happens is anger becomes the emotion that shows up on the surface. Not because that's the emotion that we feel, but it's the only emotion that we actually learn to express. And if you think about it, anger is actually one of the few emotions society allows men to show without questioning their strength. So it becomes the default. Now you can see this pattern in everyday situations, right? Sometimes it shows up in relationships. Instead of saying, hey, that hurt, or I feel like you're not understanding me, it comes out as frustration or irritation. Or sometimes you're at work and maybe you're under pressure or stressed or maybe even worried about failing, but what shows up externally is anger. And sometimes it surprises you, right? You react really strongly in a moment and later you think, why did I react like that? A lot of the times, it's because anger wasn't really the first emotion. It was just the one that made it to the surface. And this is where emotional intelligence becomes so important. And I think sometimes people hear that phrase and assume that it's something complicated or something academic, but in reality, it's pretty simple. Emotional intelligence is just the ability to notice what you're feeling, name what you're feeling, and choose how you're going to respond to it, instead of reacting automatically. Because when you don't know what you're feeling, your brain is always going to default to the strongest emotion available. And for a lot of men, that emotion is anger. Look, real strength isn't pretending that emotions don't exist. Real strength is being able to face them without letting them control you. That doesn't make someone weak. If anything, it requires awareness and discipline. And this is something a lot of Latino men are starting to recognize, right? We realize that emotional awareness isn't about abandoning our culture. It's about evolving it. Look, most Latino men weren't taught emotional intelligence. We were taught emotional containment, and there's a huge difference between the two. This channel exists because I wanted to be able to start having conversations about these differences. The kind of conversations that we were never really taught to have. So if this resonates with you, please subscribe, drop a comment. Not because I have all the answers, but because I really feel that these conversations matter and we're just getting started.